Well, we are glad you can join us again for our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. We're looking today at Psalm 39, and we have David in trouble again. He's so often in trouble. We like the fact that David is very open and transparent with us. He, by God's grace and by God's inspiration, he tells us what's in his heart. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't hide it. He tells us what's going on there, and that's a great blessing to us because we resonate with these things. We understand some of the things he's going through and the questions that he faces and the struggles that he has. And if we didn't have the Holy Scriptures to help us with this, we might think there's something wrong with us, something abnormal. When we read the Psalms like this, we realize we're not that abnormal, that even the greatest of men in the Old Testament, like David, faced these same things. Some believe that this psalm was written maybe at the end of his life, or maybe perhaps David at least thinking he's coming to the end. In verse 13 of 39, it says, "Turn your gaze away from me, that I may smile again before I depart and am no more." As he faces the Lord, he feels like he's kind of under the gaze, under the look of God, and he's struggling with that a bit. But he's saying, "I want to smile again before I am no more." So it's a possibility, anyway, that he's older now. He's looking back on his life, and he's seeing some issues and some questions he hasn't found answers to. Or at least he's looking at some insight and wisdom that he wants to bring before the Lord, but it still troubles him. And we see in the first three verses, he said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth as with a muzzle, while the wicked are in my presence. I was mute and silent. I refrained even from good, and my sorrow grew worse. My heart was hot within me. While I was musing, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. So he had some issues. He's had some complaints or some things he wants to bring up, but he's keeping it down. He doesn't want to speak up. Perhaps he feels it's beneath the honor of God that he would even challenge God or talk to God about these kinds of issues. Maybe he felt like if he brought these things up, the Lord would be displeased with him. Whatever the case might be, he's not speaking at first. He's trying to keep it under wraps. But by the time he gets to verse 4, he's not able to do that anymore. In verse 4, he says, "Lord, make me know my end, and what is the extent of my days. Let me know how transient I am." So David now, as he looks back on his life, as he sees these things, he is now going to speak to God. And on one hand, this might be a complaint. These are the three or four things we're going to look at. Might be a complaint. But on the other hand, it also might be that he's simply musing over the realities of life, and he needs to understand them better. And that probably is where he is here. The first thing he wants to understand better is the transitory nature of life. So we know that David dies around age 70, which is not ancient by any means, either in the Old Testament times or even today. But he did get to be a fairly old man. But as he lived life and he lived it fully, he looks back and he realizes as he's growing older that he's not going to be here forever. Life is brief and it's transitory, and the things he's doing now will one day cease. And he wants to understand that. He wants to live now in the light of the fact that he will not last forever. His life is transitory. Another thing that kind of goes along with that is verse 5. He wants to understand the brevity of life. He says, "Behold, you have made my days as hand's breadth, and my lifetime as nothing in your sight. Surely every man at his best is but a mere breath." Now that could speak of the brevity of life or even the accomplishments of life. David, who accomplished more than almost anybody in history, really, in many ways, he was a man handpicked by God, a man who accomplished a great deal, a man who wrote much of Scripture, led the people of Israel for many years, and yet he recognizes that he is but a breath. His accomplishments and so forth will soon be gone, and he will be too. Life is brief, and it's like a breath, and so he wants to comprehend that. He wants to live the rest of his life recognizing the brevity of life. And then he goes to one more in verse 6, the emptiness of life. Sounds a bit like Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. He says, "Surely every man walks about as a phantom. Surely they make an uproar for nothing. He amasses riches and does not know who will gather them." So he's looking at the achievements of himself and others, And he recognizes that no matter what we achieve, ultimately they are like a phantom. They don't last. They go away. They're like a shadow. And even the riches that we might amass, they're going to be spent by somebody else. If we leave money behind, we're not going to be there to spend it. Somebody else will be doing that. And so he sees a bit of an emptiness here. And so as he faces that, as he brings these things to God's attention, as he prays about them, I think there's an element of perhaps complaint and sadness, but also an element of wisdom and insight. He does want to live in light of reality, and I think all of us need to be living in light of reality, and passages like this bring us to reality. But he isn't giving up here. He talks about hope. In verse 7 he says, "And now, Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you." So he shifts from his complaints or his concerns concerning the transitory nature of life, the brevity of life, the emptiness of life. And he turns to the one thing that is not brief or transitory or empty, and that's God himself. And so he's going to ground his hope, his life, in the one thing that does not change, that is not transitory, is not brief, is not empty, and that's God himself. And so David makes the right choice here. He faces the reality of life, and then instead of letting that life destroy him and those ideals destroy him, he turns to the one person, God himself, who can make sense of all these things. And he wants to live in that way. That would be something that you and I'm sure, would want to do as well. And I trust this will give you a wonderful day in the Lord.